5, 4, and then the silent. Nick Kittle is our guest today on the Resource Exchange. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to our interview series, Resource Exchange, where we have the opportunity to talk to members of the priority-based budgeting community and also inspirations to our work, our partners, thought leaders, and people who are just cool to talk with. And Nick Kittle checks the box on all of those categories. If you, most of you are probably already familiar with Nick. He's come to speak at our annual priority-based budgeting event, or at least did so when we last met in person in 2019. And many of our client organizations have had Nick to work with them on some of his work, which we will get into today. If you are not familiar with Nick, that you are in for a treat. Nick, welcome to our experience here. We're so glad to have you. I'm happy to call you a friend, and we're always inspired by your work. Thanks for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me, Chris. It's great to be here and get a chance to chat with the audience a little bit. So awesome.
Typical approach, we have some softball questions, which we'll hit on some of those, and then we can get into some of the more meaty topics. Our audience is often, we have a bunch of readers in our group, and I'm curious, what is your favorite book, if you have one, and why?
You know, it's kind of a trick question for me a little bit. I've got this weird idiosyncratic sort of thing about me, you know, without too much kerfuffle, but I've got this part of me that ends up, that I like to read the same books over and over again, because I read so many periodicals, I read so many different things. So for me, it's actually the same books I read over and over again. And so a couple of those are, the big ones are Buckminster Fuller's A Critical Path, which is one of the most difficult books you'll ever read, but is packed with wisdom and knowledge. And I think the other one that I read actually quite a bit would be The Hobbit. So I'm a huge Tolkien fan. I love Tolkien and all that. So yeah, those are probably the ones that I lean to reading most often.
That's exciting. I've definitely read The Hobbit and as much Tolkien as I can get my hands on. And I've heard of the Buckminster Fuller Critical Path, but I've never read it. I'll be interested. We'll post that before, and you've read it multiple times. So thanks for reading on my behalf.
Yes, yeah, it's the most difficult book you'll ever read. So just know that right out of the gate.
Man, even more so than like Tolstoy, trying to keep track of like a million characters.
Maybe untranslated Russian, yeah. But other than that, yeah, it's incredibly difficult because his IQ is so high that he can barely dumb it down to a level that other humans can comprehend. So that's why it's an effort in translation. And he believes in every Oxford comma. So,
Speaking of translation, a word or two on kerfuffle. This is a word that is not like in my repertoire.
On what kerfuffle means?
Yeah.
Yeah, so kerfuffle's like, much to do about nothing. It's like, what's all the hubbub about? So yeah, throwing out the word kerfuffle here early on. Fantastic. Getting that one out of the way.
Well, these are Easter eggs, and if you don't know this, Nick also encourages, he did so yesterday, a word challenge, and explain maybe a bit about that, if you wouldn't mind, and how kerfuffle even got on the table, because it's pretty fun.
Yeah, so I do this challenge before I do interviews or keynote speeches, where I'll ask my LinkedIn audience, or sometimes the Twitter audience, hey, what are 3 random words that I should put into the speech? And so far I have never failed. I find ways to weave in whatever the 3 top voted words end up being. So yesterday, about midday, I put something out that said, what are your 3 words? And people have been voting up and down, and we've got the 3 words that I'll be using during the course of this today. But obviously kerfuffle was one of them. So you'll probably hear maybe 2 more words pop in that may be a bit unusual, but what can I say? They were voted on. Fantastic. And I have no choice but to go ahead and deliver. But for me, it helps to keep it fresh too, because when you're talking about topics that you love, it sometimes helps to keep you off center to really make sure that you're focusing your efforts on what's relevant, as opposed to just sort of going through your automatic process. So keeps me excited, I guess.
I think this is a clue to the Nick Kittle recipe for innovation, which we'll get into in just a moment. But I already have some takeaways. Speaking of topics of interest, Nick, we know you're an avid photographer, and I follow you on Instagram. What draws you to this particular art form?
Yeah, I love it. So a couple things, and just being real practical. One is that I have a terrible memory. And so when I see a picture, I can actually put myself back in the actual location I was when I took it. So it started off that way. It started off as a memory tool, to be honest. And then, what I really found was that, I'm sure all of us think that we see the world through a different lens. And I definitely feel that way too, be it literal or not. But for one moment, a brief section, a moment in time, you can sometimes capture the exact essence of what it is you're experiencing and share it with others. And it's so difficult when life moves in video to take a screen capture of that video and actually do something with it. But just occasionally, photography allows you to do that, where it's like somebody can feel the emotions, can feel the connection to the exact place and time that you were in when you took that. And I'm lucky to get to travel to a lot of amazing places. And so it seems like a good opportunity to share that with others. So that's what I love about it. And there's an artistry and a challenge to it, which I really appreciate too.
For those of you who are watching this in video format, you'll see a picture behind Nick. Did you take that picture?
I did. Yeah, this was off the side of one of the 14ers. I like to climb the 14ers. For those of you not from Colorado, they're 14,000 foot mountains. There's 58 of them in the state. And so this was off of one of the 14ers. It was a little more perilous on this side than it was on this side, as you can tell. But yeah, so took this one, and yeah, just again, one of those moments of like, okay, this is what it feels like to climb and to keep going when you're tired, when you're exhausted. It's a good reminder of that.
Super awesome. Nick, one more for like opening round. Do you have a quote that you have in your mind that inspires you in your work life, in your regular life?
Absolutely. I've got one. So I had this t-shirt when I was a kid. I used to love going to Pacific Sun. I don't know if y'all know. I mean, I guess they're still around or whatever, but it was like Yaga. Like Yaga was a thing. And so this Yaga t-shirt that I have when I was like 14 years old, it said, live the life you love and love the life you live. And ever since then, that's been my life's motto. And so I focus so much of my time on making sure that I'm doing that. And I do. I love the life that I lead, and I get the chance to go ahead and share that with others. And I try and live that life. I live this life with passion. And so that's my quote, is live the life you love and love the life you live. And that's my life motto.
It's awesome. I want to dig into your life. As we were thinking about how to dive into it, we know you as a speaker. Many people do. You are a tremendous speaker, and you're a facilitator, specifically around high performance government overall. But you started out working in local government. Can you tell us a bit more about your work in local governments?
Yeah. So, my history is a bit unusual, and my path prior to government was weird as well. So I think it led into a little bit of this, but what I started actually working for was as an analyst. I was hired as an analyst in a fleet department. And so specifically what drew them to me was my analytical Excel capabilities and my experience with fuel. Because that was my prior life, was working with oil and gas companies and hedging and locking fuel prices. And so what happened was we were able to do some things right out of the gate. And so I ended up starting to come up through the fleet ranks. Within 9 months, I was the fleet finance manager. So I was handling the entire finance half of the fleet equation. Now, to put this in perspective, the fleet was 4,500 units. So not small. And we were moving, 2.4 million gallons of gas or diesel through that fleet every single year. So this was not small money that we're talking about, and did some very creative things with fuel that ended up getting me some national recognition as well as some local recognition. People had never hedged fuel the way we had at that point. And so kind of pioneered some concepts related to fuel and how to lock fuel prices. For those of you that are familiar, these collective bargaining agreements, you can do some things with those at any rate, ended up moving that. That ended up catching attention because we were able to lock fuel at less than the market for several years in a row. Ended up catching the attention of some city managers who pulled me out of fleet and said, we'd like you to do other stuff too, and ended up working directly for the city manager for a while before I was asked to reform Public Works. So at the time, Colorado Springs kind of famously stopped watering its parks, quit running its buses, shut down its streetlights. And in that process, the city manager was transitioning out and I was asked to go ahead and reform the Public Works Department. Now that was at 30 years old. And so everybody who reported to me in that part, the 6 different divisions were all over 65-year-old white men who loved having a 30-year-old put in charge of them. So it was a great opportunity for that, for me to learn a lot about how to manage people and deal with driving progress, but also to implement a lot of different wild ideas and really push the boundaries of some things because we hadn't had Public Works in a number of years. So it was a great opportunity to do that. After a while, we ended up hiring, what I would say is a professional engineer. I'm an industrial engineer, which I understand if you're a civil engineer doesn't count. So, but process engineering is what my background is in. So I moved on to found the innovation office in Colorado Springs, which was at the time, the 5th civic innovation office in the country. And we pioneered the concept of innovation value. We dove into fully burdened cost analysis for every single programmatic activity in Colorado Springs, not dissimilar to what our friends here at ResourceX may ask you to do if you're working with them, right? Is to dive into that program level budgeting. And started doing that and did that for a number of years before I decided to leave and make my living as an artist for a year, and then came back into local government and kept going. So had a variety of different roles, and it's been really great to try my hat on in a lot of different arenas.
You talked about how this was born from analytical skills and your use of Excel in fleet as an analyst. But I love the way you tell your story, because somewhere between that was what you were good at and your role in the reforming the Public Works Department and the creation of the Innovation Office, there's a different passion or skill set that seemed to have taken hold. And I don't know, walk me through this attraction to innovation and even the creation of the Innovation Office itself. I can imagine you're great at number crunching, you're great at analysis, but then you talk about pioneering ideas and wild ideas, and now you're a reformer. I mean, how did that journey go?
Yeah, so being good with numbers, you tend to gravitate towards that because people tend not to necessarily be good at numbers. So it creates this weird competitive advantage, in sort of your career path, I guess. But what happened was that was something that would gain me attention. But what I'm really good at is pattern recognition. And so for me, it's obvious and easy. And I found that it was difficult for others, And so what happened was that as we took things, people found ways to get to no when they could find ways to get to yes. And I found that to be this fascinating process. So one of the things I didn't mention as we kind of went through that is we founded the Sustainability Office in Colorado Springs. We started off with $10,000 of one-time money and 4 people showing up to the first meeting. We turned it into an 80-person volunteer force and a $4 million office through competitive grants. And the way that and the entire time it was activating people. What's your passion? How can I activate you, right? How can I empower you? And it seemed obvious to me, and it was difficult for others. And people would come in with these sort of self-limiting beliefs or these self-governmentally limiting beliefs, and they'd merrily trot in with these things that are like, we can't do that, right? But they're doing it with a smile on their face. At any rate, it fascinated me because people found a way to get to no far more often than they found a way to get to yes. And to me, it seemed obvious on how to do it. And so it was like, okay, well, we get creative. And I found that was a huge gap for people because, and as I talk about, the creativity has been trained out of us. So we're not creative anymore. And that's not the fault of our employees. We just spent a long time teaching them how not to be. And then once you get into government, we teach you even more how not to be, right? So when it comes to actually getting innovative, you've got to get this creativity muscle dusted off. And then when it comes to implementation, people are happy with the first no. They'll stop with the first no. Grit and determination are how you accomplish things in local government. And especially when it comes to finance, this is the single most limiting factor I see people, and I'm sure you see this all the time, Chris, right? I mean, but it's the limiting factor for people is we don't have the money for that. Perfect. That is the exact hope I hope somebody says to me when I've got an idea. I don't want you to shoot down the politics of it. I just want you to say, well, if we had the money, we could do that, but we don't have the money. Perfect. Now I'm going to go find the money to do this. And I always tell people, buy chocolate for your budget folks, or coffee for them, or whatever you got to do to bribe them, because they know where the money's buried in the couch cushions of your organization, right? So it's like, if you don't have a tool, like what ResourceX is providing you, that's the easiest way to do it, is make friends with your budget people, because they know where those dollars are. But once you realize that money's not the thing that limits you, it's your determination, it's your creativity that limits you, it's your ability to get your fingernails, dirt underneath your fingernails and go make it happen. Those are the limiting factors for innovation. And most people don't see that to start with. And once I realized that was really what it was all about, then it was about activating others, teaching others, providing bandwidth for them to do it, and a framework so that risk wasn't individual, it became organizational or aggregated risk, which is a lot less risky than individual risk, right? Most organizations are dealing with, if I step out on a ledge, I might get my head chopped off, as opposed to saying, here's the criteria for innovation that we are looking for. And as long as I'm adhering to those, then we're winning, right? And now I've got 5 ideas. If 4 of them work, we're 80% successful collectively, not 1 person failed and 4 people won, right? So it's just reframing and helping people manage the concept of risk, which we're terrible judges at as humans. We're just terrible at judging risk.
Was this how the idea of an innovation came to, the innovation office came to be? Was maybe we could aggregate risk, we could have an area within our organization to activate people to give birth to new ideas, or to get others to bring their ideas to us? Or how did that innovation office launch? And then a follow-up question to that is, how has it gone since then? Is there potential for more innovation offices? Is that a good model?
I'll say that what we did, there were 4 other models to look to, and they would not work for conservative Colorado Springs. They were what I would call social models of innovation. Totally fine and totally fair, but the Boston, the Chicago, the San Francisco, and the New York models of innovation aren't going to work in Colorado Springs. So it was literally like your background there, Chris. It was a bunch of those types of whiteboards, package full of markers, 48 hours fueled by Rockstar energy drinks. And basically Jay Anderson and I locking ourselves in a room, which is, we're going to stay in here and do some stuff that fundamentally reconfigures how conservative innovation models might work. Because we couldn't adapt what was happening in those other climates. It just would not work there. So what we identified was the concept of innovation value, how to measure that, the concept of program-based budgeting, down to fully burdened cost analysis and managed competition, and running through a formalized managed competition process, but creating structures and strictures around that allowed government competing to be successful as much as it allowed private to be successful, which really had not happened on that scale at that time. The large scale data analytics for that are incredibly complex, as you know, so it was just a very difficult kind of thing. But then again, getting into this concept of innovation value, and how do we measure that, and how do we assign it a value so that we can demonstrate that value is being created versus not being created. And so that was kind of where we landed at, and that ended up getting adopted, variations of that. So where we started at versus where it morphed into are 2 different things. So that's where we started at. And what ended up happening was, the groundswell movement, the activated employees wanted to be activated more. And what happened was there was just so much energy and enthusiasm. And it comes to the space of, momentum is your key driver when it comes to a sustainability initiative or an innovation initiative. It's momentum is the key of the game. And so once we have people passionate and excited, give them tasks, enable them, empower them, and, help them understand some basics. Stay committed to the goal, but flexible about the way that you get to the goal, right? And as long as we're doing that, now all of a sudden we've activated more. So what it ended up morphing into was a heck of a lot more than that. But that's where it started at. And the model that exists in Colorado Springs today, which is still there today, which is fantastic, has morphed into even more of maybe a smart cities focus type model, a lot more civic engagement type efforts. So they've even taken it and sort of iterated into its next format, which it was always supposed to be iterated upon. So to your question on innovation offices, there is a really wonderful opportunity to create those if they are structured correctly. There are correct structures and there are incorrect structures. And if you're doing it right, they can be incredibly powerful. If you don't know what you're doing, you'll probably go through a lot of learning before you get it right. But if you're looking to hit a fast forward button, reach out to me. I'm happy to help you on that. Austin founded theirs, Kansas City, San Jose, all founded theirs originally based off of our model. So those were all innovation offices that sprang about after consultations and sort of morphed into their own versions of things. Wow. So it lives on in its own format to this day.
I hope that people do reach out to you to hit the fast forward button on how to set this up, because it is tremendously exciting. And I want to lead into your work in a Nick Kittle word, which is sustainovation. Help me bridge over to that realm. What is sustainovation?
I'm glad you asked, Chris. Well, it's kind of about shedding this dogma of the way we've always done it.
Nice.
Yep, of the way we've always done it, right? So again, that being the limiting factor, which is recognizing the government self-limit most of the time. It's about helping them recognize that they don't have to, right? So it's about these two aspects of imbuing sustainable innovation into government. And we do that through teaching our employees how to be creative again, and creativity tools that we can use to do that, how to brainstorm better, how to pilot projects so that you can learn lessons to scale up and become more effective. So I have over 65 pilot projects in my career, which is a lot. And I've got an 83% success rate, which is far too high. I should have failed more because I was an innovation officer. My job was to be the face of failure for the organization, right? Credit goes to the employees doing the work. You're the face of failure as an innovation officer in many cases. But, that was part of it, was helping folks understand what that looks like. And what I found is that people don't teach it because they don't know how to. So what people tend to try and do, and what I was seeing was that, one, people who come from government don't talk about innovation models. The ones that do are trying to sell you something, not that I'm not, right? But at the same time, what they're trying to sell you is that there's a program level way to innovate, which is true to a degree, but this is part philosophy as much as it is process, right? If you're not creative and you lack the capacity to be creative, all of the rest of it doesn't matter at all. Right? So that's the hard part when it comes to innovation, is you can retread what somebody else has already done, which happens a lot. We've got best practices, which were past practices. We trumpet those out as, as innovation in government, when really what they are is dusting off an idea that's 10 years old and putting it out there as the new thing. So for me, this whole process of sustainovation was about helping people recognize what is it we need to do to actually activate our employees, right? Let's quit thinking outside the box and start looking inside of it. And finding the ideas that our employees have and activating them as a workforce, as opposed to finding outside sources of inspiration. Let's re-inspire our employees, teach them tools to be creative, teach them how to brainstorm better because we're terrible at it. We do silly stuff. And then teach them the tools to actually implement in government, which is different than most of the private sector. You don't have to deal with the level of scrutiny in the private sector in many cases. And maybe they just got a dose of it, right? With the R&D labs, with Pfizer and Moderna and J&J having to go through public scrutiny related to their vaccine. We do that every single day in local government. You try something new, everybody's got a feeling and an opinion or thought about it, right? So there's this part of building your personal armor and taking steps forward and engaging in personal risk in order to do that overall. So what I recognize is there's mechanisms you can set up in the organization, and people need to be taught how to do that. And if we do that, you'll find that we rethink the concept of risk, and they're much more adaptable, these communities than those that aren't. And actually, that was one of my favorite parts early on in the pandemic, was the number of communities that I'd worked with that reached out to me of their own volition, just to say, I just want you to know we're prepared and ready and already thinking about this, and this as we go down this path. It was like, good. That's all I wanted you to do, was be ready to tackle the challenge and creative enough to recognize opportunity inside of chaos.
And they're trained. I mean, they recognize the need for innovation. They recognize the need for, we need new ideas to address a challenge. And that's what you've brought, is capacity or skill in training how to be innovative.
Well, and to what you do too, Chris, right? I mean, if you think about it, right, when people are coming up with the idea of how they want to spend the money, right? If we're going to prioritize stuff, how are we going to spend the money? And as they're coming up with that, what's the level of creativity that's going into that? In many cases, there's probably maybe even a potentially higher best use, but we don't know what we don't know. And, and we haven't gone through those things. So maybe we come up with, a good purpose, but is it the best purpose? And lots of times that creativity, reigniting that in our employees and reigniting their passion and learning how to leverage that, it's huge, because then all of a sudden it's like, yes, we're going to make this happen. Let me show you the results. And then we prove it out, right?
Amazing. I skipped a question. I wanted to go back to it. And so much of who you are, Nick, you're capable of igniting anybody into a passionate state. But the question was around what inspired you to ultimately pursue work along the lines that you're doing as consultant, as coach, as facilitator, as speaker. You've chosen a role to play in the world. And it's very interesting to think about what you're doing and why you chose to pursue the kind of work that you provide these days. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, thanks. And I think that's a really touching question, because it hits on a lot for me. I think, one of the things I recognized was that this is, and I don't know how to put this except to say that this is easier for me in some ways than I noticed it being for others. And so there's something inside of that to be taught, right? And when I recognized working in Colorado Springs, so I had this moment in Colorado Springs, and this is part of my TED Talk, but I died when I was 35 years old. And so fundamentally changed my life. I quit my job. I started being an artist. I made my living as an artist for a year. And then when I realized I wasn't going to die that day, again, I rejoined government. And in the process of doing that, I asked myself some really tough questions. And I do a lot of coaching and mentoring around this space with other people at different points in their career. But people get to this place in their career where they really struggle with, am I making the impact that I want to make? Is this what I want to be doing with myself? They struggle through a lot of that, imposter syndrome, all of these sorts of things that sort of tag into our own fears that keep us locked in a channel in life. And this is our path. And I've been on this path for 19 years. So I need to keep going on this path. And, it dawned on me. I was like, what is it that actually is my real currency in this life? So when I coach people, I ask them, what's your real currency? And I don't mean what you get paid by, right? But what actually, if you got paid in this every single day, would make you excited to go do it again? And for me, what I found out was that it was the light bulb going off in somebody's eyes, where they're either inspired on a level, or they get something they've never gotten before, or they feel empowered to do something they've been afraid of. That's my real currency, which means that there's only a handful of jobs that I can do really well if I want to get paid my currency, And so those are things like teacher, trainer, speaker, facilitator. Then it became about how can I take these concepts that I know as I've learned them the hard way, going through this world of local government, put them to the test. And so when I joined Adams County, I took those lessons that I'd learned in Colorado Springs, added them some other lessons, tested the theories out so that I made sure that they were battle tested in city, county, liberal, conservative, that they could withstand the test of time, if you will. Round out that experience and then start to share that with others. So when I originally designed Sustainability, I didn't write it as a book. I wrote it as a series of lessons and trainings. And so this was actual trainings that I would do in my innovation academies with folks that would come through my program. And then I started to expand it into more of a book style format. And that's how I do what I do today, which is it pays me in the currency that I really care about, which is that connection with people and seeing that light bulb go off. And it's so hard to switch it off. Like once it goes on, people never go back. And that's life-changing work. And what I know about what we do is that and the reason I target local government is because it matters more. It just matters more. The work that we do impacts tens, if not hundreds of thousands of lives. And if there's a higher calling, I don't necessarily know what it is, but that's a pretty powerful place to begin. Is if we can teach the people to do the things that they don't know how to do or have forgotten how to do, and we can empower them, then they can go ahead and actually make those differences in the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. And that's what drew me into this space. And that's why this space. And the other thing is that I was tired. The latitude that you have as CEO is you get to say whatever the hell you want. And I was tired of going and speaking the plain truth at events and then having some politician in a room who would call up my boss and attempt to get me fired after I said what was absolutely fundamentally true, right in your face and 100% there. And consistently, I would have a politician try and rein me in and call up a boss or somebody in an attempt to get me fired. And so, I'll leave the curse words out, but it was really, what the funk is this? And I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to speak the truth because people need to hear it. And that's how we actually achieve results. So I can do that in the role I'm in now, where I could never do it before. And if you don't like what I say, you don't hire me and you don't work with me. And I'm cool with that. But at least I'll tell you the straight truth. And that's hard to get. So.
And thanks, Kelly, for typing in the chat. And for you too, Angel, if anybody has questions or comments for Nick along the way, please go ahead and use chat and we'll try to interject those as we go. But Kelly had commented that what he loved was the currency I care about. That's powerful.
Thanks, Kelly.
And I love hearing about your vision. And you chose a role, you chose an industry to impact local government. I mean, you could have applied the same thinking to fleet auto parts industry or the fleet industry. You are going towards local government, thinking about the impact that you can have on so many people. And I think that's what draws so much of us to this kind of work overall, is thinking about that big picture impact, which is amazing.
I want to tag onto that for a second too, Chris, because when I was publishing Sustainnovation, I actually had originally a publisher that I was working with, and just to the stigma that local government carries, right? When I was writing the book, I said, I want this geared towards local government. That's what it's for. It's for local governments, because the rules are different in local governments. And there's a small subset of people who've actually done it. And that's who we should be listening to. And there are more, than just me, but that's the group that we should be, not consultants who've never done it or been there before, not outsiders who have great academic pedigrees and have never worked a hard day in our roles in their lives. And what happened was the publisher said, this book, in order to be marketed better, shouldn't be towards local government. It should be towards everybody. We'll make it about innovation in general. These are great principles for everybody. And I said, absolutely not. I want it towards local government. They said, I don't think there's a market there. And I said, I don't really care what you think. I'm not asking you, I'm letting you know. And I parted ways with that publisher in the middle of that process, because it's personally important to me that this is the audience I want to be impacting and speaking to, because that's the audience that doesn't get addressed. And that person's thing was, it's the oxymoron type comment. They made that comment to me. That was immediate termination of our relationship right there. That's the whole point, is we can do better. Yes, we can. And that's what this is about. So, it was funny though, just to the point of local government doesn't get those chops. No, we don't. Even to the point where I had to switch publishers in order to be able to publish for us as an audience, which is Looney Tunes to me. And I don't think is a problem for anybody now. But again, seemingly it was a problem for people.
Amazing. I mean, if you think about it, for the entire globe, what is in common where most people are? If our work is truly to impact people, what is in common about where people are throughout the entire world? You could say that in most areas there might be roads, there might be houses, and you can get into that industry and have an impact on everybody. There's also cities and counties. There is a form of an organized infrastructure of governance that tries to tackle collectively the problems that this community is facing, whether it's a homeowners association, a city, a tribal councilor. And if you can have an impact on the agency, then you can have an impact on people across the world. It's amazing. It's a great vehicle for the incredible positive change that you seek.
Well, and if the politics are local, right, then so are the consequences in so many cases, right? So it's like you have to address that local discussion, because the consequences happen at that level, right? The responsibility happens at that level. The politics happen at that level. So it just seemed fascinating to me that it was like, well, let's not worry about local, right? Let's just have a big message so we can sell books. And it's like nonsense. This is the point, right? Which is to say nobody targets this conversation to us. And our conversation is, I would argue, more important in some cases. People don't connect to their state when they're typically thinking about something. They're not connecting, they're thinking about what's happened in their community right now, whether that's their county, whether that's their city. That's what they're thinking about. What's happening in my development, my HOA. That's where people are thinking about. So, yeah.
I want to hit on your book, and you titled it Sustainability, Building Sustainable Innovation in Government, One Wildly Creative Idea at a Time. And we had a question about, tell us about some of your favorite wildly creative ideas.
Love that. I got some fun ones. I think I'll start with one that we didn't do that I just really love, which was Street Bump in Boston. Love those folks. The Boston folks, Nigel Jacobs, Chris Osgood, they put something out early on called Street Bump. Open source app. If you haven't heard of it, what it would do is it would take we're talking 2009 to put this in perspective, okay? But it would take your phone, take your iPhone or whatever, and use the accelerometer in your iPhone to make determinations about smoothness of a roadway. And so basically, if your phone was active and you had Street Bump up and you were driving to work, it would automatically record vibrations in the roadway. And once a certain depth or difficulty of vibration was reported repeatedly, then it would trigger automatic work to be created out of their public works department to go review the roadway, repair the pothole, other things like that. What I love is they had the foresight to make it open source so that it had the potential to be copied. We were actually at the point when I left in Colorado Springs trying to adapt it for a bicycle version, so that you could do the same kind of things on trails, right? Put it in your bike, and then as you're running over stuff, you'd get trail conditions. So I thought that was really slick, because here it is using automated data. And what they also did was they realized that there was a Big Brother problem in their pocket, right? And people didn't want Big Brother on their phones, like monitoring their locations. So what they got food trucks to use it. And so the food trucks would go, and then they use that for a food truck app that, if you were on that, would show the location of the food trucks around. So now you could be found as a food truck. The food trucks were contributing to the overall data inputs for the network itself. And they found a way to start collecting that data. I just love that as a concept, because it tackles multiple different things that we're interested in. Tacos, automations, this sort of open source concept that we share. So just it tackled a lot of things that I loved at the time. So I really love that as just one example. Lots of others. I'm happy to go through a few more, but that's a big one I love.
That's completely cool. Man, it's exciting when you think about an idea and then it turns you on to think about like, oh, wow, what a great intersection of vehicles that want to be tracked. Kelly says, you had me at tacos. Kelly introduced us to an amazing taco joint in Edmonton. Feel free to drop it in the chat, Kelly, if Nick Kittle would be very interested in this. But that it's inspiring when you realize that not everything's been figured out. And there's a lot of room for innovation. And you come up with an idea like this, it's like, man, that's genius. And then it makes you feel like, I could do that. I could come up with an idea like that, or there's room for ideas like that.
That's right. I mean, I think that's part of it, is just recognizing that gap's there. And maybe that's, but just like this, right? Steal Like an Artist, it's a great book by Austin Kleon. But, the point of that is that, we could have taken Street Bump and made a Colorado Springs Street Bump. They made it open source, so you could do that. We took the idea and we iterated on it, right? Take somebody else's best practice concept, morph it into your own. Put your own flavor on it. If you're in, and I go down to Sugar Land, Texas next week, but put some sugar on top of this bad boy and turn it into your own souffle. I don't know that actually works. I don't know the souffles are I don't know what I'm talking about. That's not even a word. I don't even think use the word souffle, but it's in there. But just turn it into your own idea or give credit where credit's due, right? Which is those guys, Nigel and Chris in Boston were the ones who came up with that. I thought just a great concept, but so many different great ideas are just small ones that grow bigger and bigger, and they usually jump around. They usually jump in around, how can I be empowered to do that? And people just lose sight of the fact that they are. A lot of the other stuff that we did that I really loved was involved with urban intervention. So I think one of the things that we did that was unique too, very different, was we actively worked with a group of citizen activists. So I was embedded in their organization as part of their board of directors. We would actively target projects in the urban right of way and in our downtown spaces and in our urban areas. And we would, with approval and support from government, go out and tackle those together. And some of them were big and massive, and some of them were small. But there were things that I couldn't do by myself and they couldn't do by themselves, because it would require massive amounts of permits or approvals, or it would require significant public input process. Instead, it was like an advocacy group of citizens who were willing at any time to jump in behind what we were after. And we did some really cool stuff, to the point of tacos, where we took an abandoned gas station in the downtown that was owned by the YMCA. The city ended up taking a $0 low risk lease on it because they weren't going to develop the land. We turned it into and fixed up the gas station, turned it into a temporary home for food trucks in the downtown. Now, all kinds of challenges with that, right? Old gas station doesn't need to be remediated. Well, guess who issues that decision? The city does, right? So there's all these moments where it was like the city handles this piece, private handles this piece. You can do this, I can do this. And then when we went to council for things that ended up being controversial on some level, they were already well informed about what the concept was and were willing to speak up on it. We did probably 10 different great projects as that group to really activate the downtown, which was just a really fun experience to use citizen activists as a party to our success, and not as the friction and the fight point, but as the activated point, right?
Right, not as a friction. They were directionally correct. Man, Nick, I have a couple more questions that are on my mind, and then we do have some from the audience as well. And I did want to give you last word. Early on in today's discussion, you had talked about how an in for you can sometimes be when someone says, I don't have the resources for that, I don't have the money. And that is a great clue for like, innovation is needed here. We're going to have to be creative. It's a way to turn it around. Now we have the American Rescue Plan Act, and in some ways the money is there. And so I wanted to get into what excites you the most about the potential for local governments, given these resources.
Yeah, I think on the highest level, what's most exciting is that this is a level of cash infusion never seen in the history of American government. I mean, historically speaking, we've never seen this much, right? CARES Act, 233% more than you got in the CARES Act, right? On average. That's crazy, right? And here's the challenge that's presented before us too when it comes to this space though, Chris, which is one of the questions I ask in Sustainability workshops is, what would you do with 10 million bucks? Or 1 million bucks, or whatever is appropriate for the size of the community? It is fundamentally one of the hardest questions for government employees to answer, because they always come back with, that's not feasible. That's not how it works. It's always cut, right? Do more with less. So when it comes to expand your mind to what you would fund if you had funding, government employees typically are incredibly bad at that because it just hasn't been something. So what excites me is that the funding is there to create an innovation fund. Whether that's displacement, whether that's through some other creative mechanism, the guidance that's listed, which just came out the other day, came out on Monday. I've read through it, it's 151 pages. So much flexibility inside of that. Second of all, you have the money in your bank account already. As a larger community, as a smaller community, you'll get it in less than 30 days, right? So you've got the money. Now it just becomes about being creative in the ways that you're going to use it and justify that use. So it's a time to set up an innovation fund, whether that's through displaced funds or not. but it is time for you to go ahead and make this move. And let's redefine risk. The way we've always done it has always been deeply unsafe. And if the pandemic hasn't shown us that, then I don't know what has. But let's recognize that innovation is the hedge against the risk of the way we've always done it. That's what we're after, right? Is preventing full exposure to failure. And what we're doing hasn't been working. Well, now you have cash to try something new. So the greatest tragedy would be that if you suck at spending this money, if you don't use this as an opportunity to right the ship of your government first, right? Let's steady the eddy here for a second, and then invest in something new and wild and different that's forward leaning, that attempts to solve something that you have never had the funds to solve before. Lots of ways that could go about, but just the fact that people have access to these funds for the first time ever is massive.
In terms of specifically, I mean, I love the recommendation. This is the opportunity. Set up your innovation fund. Is that something that you have a fast forward button for how to set up a blueprint for the basics of an innovation fund as well?
Absolutely. If you got interest in learning more about that, hit me up. Happy to help you on that. It's real easy. I'll provide you with a free resource right out of the gate that you could take, convert to your own, run with it, plug and play. And we can talk through deep dive if you'd like to go ahead and get more specific about that. But it is similar in nature to what we do with priority-based budgeting in general, which is say, here's the list of potential projects. Maybe here's the risk associated with those projects, right? The opportunity associated with that risk. And, which of these do we want to fund? And what's the oversight look like? It's not complex. It's simple, but sometimes it's not easy unless you're getting that fast forward, right?
I'm extremely excited about that. Man, there's some connections that with some of the work that's going on in Pittsburgh right now, as well, for what to do with some of the savings generated from their ideas to reallocate towards a fund that can fund new ideas around sustainability, climate action, and to think about it from a revolving fund type of structure. Creating an innovation fund is a huge takeaway from this experience. And I really hope that now that you've read the guidance, that people will think about doing that. These are one-time funds, and here's how to use one-time investment to create something that's more of an ongoing return on investment forevermore, which is awesome.
Well, and just even folks, and I don't know that we're prospecting, but what you do, Chris, right, is in a form and fashion an eligible expense, right? Just like if you've never done community engagement, eligible expense. If you've never tracked your assets, eligible expense, right? Use these things to make systemic improvements in what you do. Find the projects with ROI that set you up for success after. Don't just restore bodies back to chairs that you won't be able to fund going forward, right? So that's my hope, is that people do better than they did with the CARES Act. Please do better, because there was some lowest common denominator thinking involved in some of that, and that was just fine because maybe that's what it had to be. But I think there's just a lot more opportunity inside these funds.
It's awesome. Nick, we did have one completely off the wall question that I'm going to ask because you're Nick Kittle, and I think it would be fun to see how your mind processes this. But the question was, ask Nick how many cows there are in Canada. No joke.
How many cows there are in Canada?
That's the question. Liz, you can correct me if I'm wrong. That is the question that came in. I think someone wanted to see how the mastermind begins to even contemplate the calculation.
You got it right.
Based on based on the cow to acre ratio, and including habitable terrain, I don't have the foggiest idea. But what I will say is I believe in bovalexia, the uncontrollable urge to lean out the car window and yell moo at a cow as I pass. I don't know if that helps. How many are there? I assume it was Kelly asking that question. How many are there, Kelly? 3.56 million, huh? All right.
That is precise, Kelly.
I was going to go with someone in the neighborhood of 2 million, and I would have been way off.
That did not come from Kelly.
That didn't come from Kelly. Gotcha.
It did not come from Kelly, which is
thanks for answering it though, Kelly. I appreciate that.
Final word, Nick. I want to turn it over to you, and a part of the joy of doing these interviews is just making sure that people know who you are. I think you shine in everything that you talk about, and your pursuit of teaching sustainable innovation, your passion for local government. I'm so happy that you took the time to be with us today. What did we not cover that you wish I would have talked about or asked you about?
I think, I just want to say thanks, Chris, for having me on. Like, I really appreciate the chance to partner with folks like ResourceX, and I love the work that you do. It is very much in alignment with the right kinds of thinking that governments need to be. There's no reason we shouldn't be engaged in the alignment of our dollars around our true priorities. That's common sense and should be smart for every city, right? So I'll say that. So I love the alignment that we have organizationally. I think, the thing that maybe wasn't asked is, I just want you to know out there personally, anybody watching, that I traveled to 50 different communities in 2019 to spread a message of high performance government or sustainability. I love being able to inspire employees. I love being able to train employees. I love being able to work with large groups. I'm excited to be able to do that again, as I'm vaccinated now, so I get the chance to. But what I'll say is that I judge your communities by your disc golf course. So I'm an avid disc golfer, and I eat barbecue voraciously. So just know that when I come to your community, I am judging you based on your disc golf and your barbecue. And you may never have known that those were metrics that somebody might further judge and therefore recommend your community on. But if you're lacking in one of those, I would suggest that you address that using your ARP funds immediately.
That is brilliant.
That's all I got.
Nick, I mean, it's a mic drop moment, but it's also like my mind goes to the Richard Florida and his metrics on creative class cities. And I don't know if that was covered there, but you might have. It's like the Sabre metrics. It's the Kittle metrics of successful cities. I think you've added two that have previously not been touched upon.
I'm just glad today we could have that groundbreaking moment. And the three words, Chris, which I did use all three, were dogma, kerfuffle, and merrily.
Merrily, I guessed souffle was your third one, but I was off on that. I thought I gauged a slight pause and enunciation on souffle, which would have been good too.
I did, but it was a non sequitur, it turns out. So, and Kelly thought it was tacos. I would have woven the word tacos in anyways, Kelly. Like that, it was like a personality characteristic to be like, I'm tacos.
Nick, thank you very much. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope that you get in touch with Nick. Check out our website. We'll be posting a link to Sustainability, which we definitely hope that you will purchase and read and bring some of these ideas back to your organization. We hope that you'll be in contact with Nick to see how you set up an innovation fund and how you turn on your people. Was my takeaway, that this is something that every organization is capable of doing internally, not always being dependent on outside consultants and experts, that this is something you can activate, that was Nick's word, internally with the minds of your own organization. So Nick, thanks again. This is totally awesome. I really appreciate this experience, and so happy that it's recorded for us to turn to as well, like you return to your books.
Thanks for having me, Cal. Thanks for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, that's a wrap on the recording.